Welcome to the BERNINA Skillbuilder Sew Along with Sweet Potato Quilts. In this video, we're working on block 2 where the focus is on making 2 at a time half square triangles. I've already pulled up the free PDF pattern from the blog and gathered all of my pieces cut from yardage following the instructions in the pattern introduction document. Here are fabrics 1 through 5 along with all of my background pieces that match the piece count column in the pattern. Before we get into the 2 at a time half square triangles though, let's take a moment to review the skill from the last block, which is 4 at a time flying geese. For this, I will need 1 larger background square and 4 smaller squares from fabric 5. I've already drawn a diagonal line on the back of each of the 4 smaller squares, and now I will follow the written instructions in the pattern to sew them into 4 at a time flying geese. Although we've already covered 4 at a time flying geese in the last block pattern and tutorial, there's something different I want to walk you through here. This time we are trimming the flying geese to 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches, which is smaller than the ones we made last time. The concepts are still the same though. We want the point of the triangle to stay 1/4 inch from the top edge while keeping it centered along the longer edge. To do this, we need to find the 2.25 inch mark on the ruler that's also 1/4 inch away from the edge. For trimming, I like to use my smaller 6.5 inch square ruler. It's big enough for this size of flying geese, and I find smaller rulers easier to manage. By the way, using a larger ruler when you don't need can make trimming feel a little cumbersome. So I'm looking for the point that's 2.25 inches down from this edge, and here the tip of my flying geese lines up with the bottom point of this white line. The diagonal seams will end at the corners that measure 2.5 inches from the ruler's side. If you see the fabric extending past the 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch markings, that's a good sign because it means you will not trim the block too small. Go ahead and trim along the 2 edges, then rotate the unit. Line up the freshly cut sides with the 2.5 inch line and the 4.5 inch line. All of your points will fall into place automatically, and you can trim the remaining 2 edges. Now you have a perfect 4.5 inch by 2.5 inch flying geese unit. Repeat this process with the remaining 4 flying geese. Alright, now it's time to move into the main skill building portion of this pattern, which is 2 at a time half square triangles. I have 4 squares cut from fabrics 1, 2, 3, and 4, along with 4 background fabric squares. According to the pattern instructions, I will pair each background fabric square with 1 fabric square from 1 through 4, placing them right sides together. And I've already drawn a diagonal line across the back of each background square with a pen. That way, when you place them right sides together, the guideline is ready to go. And you will also notice that all of the squares for this process are at the same size, so they should line up perfectly. Now it's time to take these units to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of each diagonal line. I'm back! Can you tell that I chain pieced these units together? Well, now it's time to separate them, and if you look closely, you will see the seams stitched 1/4 inch on both sides of the diagonal lines. The next step is to divide each unit in half by cutting along the diagonal lines, and if you peek at this one, you can already see the half square triangle taking shape as it opens up. As I cut the rest of these units in half, I want to share a quick safety habit that I've picked up. I use the Missouri Star Quilt Co. Olga ruler, which has a retractable blade. I only expose the blade when it's facing and moving towards the fabric, right before I make the cut, and as soon as I'm done, I retract it again. This small habit gives me peace of mind. Whether I'm moving the ruler and fabric around or simply setting the cutter down, I know the blade is not exposed. So if your cutter is similar or same as mine, I would try to adopt the same kind of habit. So now that all these units are cut in half, it's time to take them over to the pressing station. Here at the pressing station, I want to point out that there's more than one way to press your half square triangles. Many quilters prefer to press the seams open, and if that's your style, I suggest pressing them open with your finger first, then following along gently with your iron. My own preference is to press seams towards the darker fabric since it helps prevent the seam from showing through the finished quilt. To do that, I place the lighter fabric directly on the ironing mat, then open the darker fabric on top, keeping the seam in place as it naturally wants to fall that way. After that, I press with the iron. If you do press the seams open, you will notice the dog ears on both sides of the seam, but if you press to the dark side, All the dog ears will point in the same direction. Now that these units are pressed, it's time to trim them down to 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I also want to mention that I am a left-handed trimmer, so you will see me trimming along the left and top edges of my ruler. If you are right-handed, you will be trimming along the right and top edges instead with the rotary cutter in your right hand. To trim, start by finding the 3.5 inch markings on your ruler from the two sides you are trimming. With that in mind, set it on top of the half square triangle while making sure that the diagonal line on your ruler is aligned with the seam of your half square triangle. When you look at the unit under your ruler, you will notice that the fabric extends past those 3.5 inch lines, and that's exactly what you want because it ensures that you will not trim the unit too small. Go ahead and trim along the two edges, then rotate the unit. Since those first two edges are already perfectly trimmed, you will line them up now with the 3.5 inch markings on your ruler. The diagonal line should still match your seam, and that extra fabric that was hanging over the two sides is what you will trim away in this step. Now you've got a perfect 3.5 inch half square triangle. Go ahead and repeat this process for the rest of the half square triangles you need for this block. Here are my half square triangles with fabrics 1, 2, 3, and 4, along with a little pile of tiny scraps from trimming. At this point, everything is ready to piece the rest of the block. I will show you a quick assembly here, but you will want to follow the step-by-step instructions in the pattern to piece everything together in the correct order. Hey, I'm on page 6 of the block 2 pattern right now, and I want to show you something important. At the very top of the page, you will see an arrow that indicates my recommended pressing directions for seams. These are just suggestions. You are always welcome to press your seams open if that's your preference, but the arrows are there to help you get nested seams if that's what you want. For example, if the pattern arrow says to press seams towards square A, that means your seams should be headed towards that solid square A. Another thing I want to point out is this. When you sew your half square triangles to another piece, you will not immediately see the perfect points the way we did with the flying geese from block 1. Instead, you will notice a small gap, and that's exactly how it should look. Because when you sew right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam, that extra space will disappear, giving you those clean points. Now let's look at these two units with HSTs. According to the pattern, one of them needs to be rotated. When you place them right sides together, notice how the seams go in opposite directions. And when you hold the seams in your fingers, you will feel them lock into place. This nesting ensures your points line up beautifully when sewn. Here are those units sewn together, and if you look at the back, you will notice the seams are pressed in opposite directions. After stitching them together though, I did press the new seams open, which gives you those really clean, crisp points right where they meet. Now with your half square triangles in place, you've got the space you need for your 1/4 inch seams, and you can sew them into the rest of the block. I'm going to finish piecing this block following the instructions of the pattern, and I will meet you back once it's complete. Here's my finished block, and before we wrap up, I want to point out a few more pressing details from the pattern. You'll see that there are several spots where the arrows recommend pressing seams in opposite directions. For example, in the top row, the seams press outward, while in the middle row, the seams press inward towards center and then outward again. Following these arrows will give you nested seams that fit together beautifully. And one more thing to note, those corners on your half square triangles have already found their points, but the outside points will not match just yet. That's completely normal because they're not sewn into the quilt yet. Once you trim to the right size and follow that diagonal 45-degree seam line, everything will come together the way it should. So keep going with confidence. I hope you enjoy making this block as much as I did, and I will see you next time.